Today on the PitchBook podcast, Zach is pitching Frederick Douglass by David W. Blight, and I am pitching Quantum Supremacy by Michio Kaku. Batter up! Zach, they've done it. They've done it. They put the chip in the brain. We are now cyborgs. Tell me about this.
First cyborg. I don't know if you could call it a cyborg, but
yeah, I know.
This has been something.
But that's going to get the listeners to listen. Is that we're talking about that?
Well, of all the AI books I read last year, the thing I was really thinking about, because I know that Elon Musk has been built this company called Neuralink. And the intent of the company is to plant a chip into people's brains who have some neurological, physical disability. That's like their motor skills are debilitating their brain is debilitating their ability to move,
Right.
And so Neuralink on Sunday, this is a little blurb written by Riva Gold, who is an editor at LinkedIn News, which I like LinkedIn News because these are short articles. But it says Neuralink implanted its first device in a live human's brain on Sunday. Elon Musk wrote on X, marking a potential milestone in brain-computer interface technology that could eventually assist those with conditions such as paralysis. The patient is recovering well, he said Monday, adding that the first product, telepathy is the name of the product, will allow humans to control devices such as smartphones or computers with their minds. Neuralink joins other companies such as BlackRock Neurotech in testing brain implants and has faced scrutiny over its safety treatment of animals. A couple bullets. Initial users will be those who have lost the use of their limbs, Musk added. The company did not provide the safety and efficacy data required to assess the implant's success. Researchers said Neuralink was last valued at $3.5 billion. Its device contains over 1,000 electrodes, which is significantly more than its peers. Neuralink said in May it had received approval to conduct its first human trials, and in September said it was recruiting patients with quadriplegia. So I think that's pretty cool, and who knows where this goes long term. But I like where it's starting. to have some kind of motor, you haven't been able to move your body or to walk, or I used to have this neighbor who lived down the street. He was single and a little bit advanced in age. I would say maybe not super advanced, but like maybe 70s. And he just couldn't get around very well. I'd get phone calls at 2 a.m. because, we were kind of like watch over him. And one night he had fallen and gashed his head open and couldn't get up. And yeah, he had Parkinson's. Mm-hmm. So got him in my car. He's kind of bleeding all over. I've got a rag on his head, and we're driving to the hospital and get there. And to the emergency room, and the nurse comes out. We put him in a wheelchair, and I said, his name is such and such, and she looks at me and says, "We know." Like, that wasn't
he's been there before. Got it.
He's been there so many times. Yeah. And I think of somebody, there are so many people like Michael J. Fox and others who have these diseases that, it's like their mind's there, but their body just isn't working. So I'm excited to see how that progresses. What are your thoughts? What do you think?
I think it's interesting is actually it dovetails right into my book. So
let's do it.
It was good. It was good timing. Yeah. So I'll give you, I guess, let me just explain the book a little bit, and then we can talk a little bit about how they propose to solve this with quantum computing. So the book that I read it's called Quantum Supremacy. Michio Kaku is his name. And I swear, if you look up a picture, you'll recognize him, because I didn't until I looked up his picture. I'm like, oh, I know this guy. Anyway, it's a book basically that's talking about quantum computing and explains a little bit about what quantum computing is and how it can potentially solve problems in the future. So tell me everything you know about quantum computing. Zach, what do you know?
Uh, I know that, well, I don't know anything. Uh,
That's
I don't know
well,
anything
good.
about quantum computing. The
There's
little that
somebody
I do
who,
know, I would be, exhibiting the Dunning-Kruger effect, where I think I know
yes,
a little bit, but absolutely know
yeah,
nothing
and that's me
about it.
too. That's me too.
So
But
I'm really interested to hear your thoughts,
yeah,
because
yeah. So quantum computing, he actually goes through the history of computers. I don't know if you saw that show. Oh man, I can't remember the name of the show where they break the Enigma device that the Germans had to code
oh yeah, with Benedict
Turing. Yeah,
Cumberbatch,
yeah.
yeah,
Turing,
the Turing
Alan
machine.
Turing. Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, he talks about kind of that. So that's kind of a mechanical computer. He talks about the history of mechanical computers. There was some Greek. There was a Greek artifact they found that was basically the first kind of mechanical computer. Anyway, it goes into digital computers, and basically digital computers, they found could do zeros and ones, and they're really good, obviously, at certain tasks. And quantum computing, and this gets way into territory I don't quite understand, but I'll give you the Matt Liggett version of it. Basically, you've got zeros and ones and any variation in order of those. But with quantum computing, you have zeros and ones, and then uh, things that can be both a zero and a one at the same time. So, which makes not a lot of sense, right? That's why quantum theory is so hard for people to understand. But basically, what it can do is it can calculate so much faster and so much more because it can be both a zero and a one. That's called superposition at the same time. Okay. So I don't know how to explain that any better other than like it, the way he talks a little bit about like if you're a rat in a maze and you're an old computer, if you're a rat, you start at point A and get to the maze at the end, and you just have one way to find it. This would be like the one mouse going every way at the same time, all at the same time finding the exit. So
Okay.
it's orders of magnitude more powerful computing. The challenges, though, are that you need to have stability. So if you were, my computer, I can, walk around with my laptop and talk. If you get anywhere close and maybe sneeze next to a quantum computer that's not, quite because those elements need to be in such a stable state. You can't even sneeze close to it, right? It'll mess up. So, and the other thing is they have to be, at least right now, I think they have to be at absolute zero to be able to compute. So there's just a lot of limiting factors in our ability to create large, or quantum computers that are stable. They're obviously making progress, and he dives a lot into that, which I'm not going to get into because you can already tell I don't know what I'm talking about. But other than the fact that what was interesting and I did not realize is that there are different ways to design these computers. So there are some ways to do it so you don't have to have such a low temperature to be more stable. But ultimately, what it means once, and this is happening now, you can kind of rent space with quantum computers right now, and what it means is that the quantum computers will be able to solve very, very complex equations very quickly. And that has a lot of that brings a lot of opportunities and a lot of issues. First thing you think of is like is cryptography. So you know
Mm-hmm.
your passwords and things like that. Now it would take a normal computer to break like a 256 bit um,
Encryption.
encryption. It would take thousands and thousands of years for a normal computer. Well, it might take a few seconds with a quantum computer. So there's got to be post quantum cryptography that talks about, so that the bad guys can't get into get stuff that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
He talks a lot about that, but probably one of the more interesting things he talks about is basically then he goes into different um, opportunities or problems to solve. So he talks about how you can solve some of the questions of biology that are too complex, right? Like how do certain molecules do this, all the way to you know re I guess figuring out how the Big Bang started, right? And some of the math that's too difficult for traditional computers. But probably what was most promising is, and this is kind of goes to what you're talking about with the Neuralink, is how it can help solve diseases, right? So how can it help, first of all, with viruses and bacteria. He talks about how things are tested, how drugs are tested now, and it takes so much time and investment and almost like one-on-one guesswork. Like, okay, well, if we use this antibiotic, will it break down this bacteria the proper way, and why? How does it break down? Well, now they can actually just run they not now, but soon they'll be able to run simulations that will be much quicker and much less expensive to be able to produce drugs that can solve those problems, whether it's a viral infection or bacterial, all the way to, he talks about Alzheimer's and how the proteins fold incorrectly or something with Alzheimer's, and talks about how they could potentially cure cancer, find ways to basically get around that. So there's a lot of cool, interesting things that are going to be helped by quantum computing. And to me, it was kind of a really hopeful book that in other words, you got you got the neural link, and it's almost like, well, shoot, should we wait a minute? And now we can just find this particular, we can simulate this chemistry and figure out how to, correct the misfolded proteins or whatever it is to fix this problem. So anyway, there's just a lot of cool, interesting problems that can be solved with quantum computing. There's some stuff that he talks about with just investments, and in other words, there's going to be a lot of money. There has been a lot of money that has been invested in this, and there's going to be continue to be a lot of money because there's so many potential use cases for quantum computing, and he just kind of lays all that out. And I don't have a lot to say other than it was kind of a hopeful book in a way
Yeah.
that like they can solve a lot of problems, and there's so much cool potential because they can run so many complex simulations at a rapid pace and potentially solve problems without the trial and error that we are used to now. And anyway, so I thought it was a really cool book. Um, I don't know what questions you have that I don't even know if I can answer them, but I'll try.
Okay, so The Imitation Game, that's the movie we were thinking of
Yep,
with
yep, okay,
Benedict Cumberbatch,
yep.
which in a different movie, did you ever see the Endgame, the Marvel
Yeah,
movie
yeah,
where he's
yep.
Doctor Strange and
Uh-huh.
he travels to, I don't know, a million different universes and comes
Right.
back and they say, how many times were we successful? And he
And he
says
says,
one.
yeah, that's kind of
So
like
not
that,
good
right?
odds.
Well, that's
Yeah,
kind of like
but
what the computer can do, right? It can go run all
right,
those simulations and then figure out which is
exactly.
the one that works.
But not wait for 10
Right.
years. Like this can happen.
Exactly.
You put in the model, run this one. Nope. Okay. Or run
Multiple models at once.
multivariate.
Yeah.
Yeah. All at once. And it comes back and says, this is probably the right combination of chemicals or compounds, or that is really interesting. And that's kind of cool because I feel like for a long time, you've got pharmaceutical companies that trial and error. They don't get
Yep.
FDA approved, and like there's so many flame out companies that just don't succeed. But on the tech side, it seems like that's been more stable, where people can build and develop technology. But now the technology is kind of reaching over to the. I guess
Yeah.
technology has always helped
Sure.
biotech, but in this way, it seems like more productive.
Well, and he basically just talks about how there haven't been a lot of new antibiotics created because of the expense, and obviously these companies have to make money, so they don't necessarily want to put a whole bunch of money into something that might fail. So they'd rather just model this with a quantum computer. And anyway, so there it was very, very interesting. He does go quite a bit into the history of quantum mechanics, right? And who
Hmm.
discovered what, Newton did this. So there's a lot of stuff that's, in other words, it's not just about quantum computing, it's about the history of the quantum research and field. So there's a lot of cool stuff in there. I As far as recommendation, I would say this is probably a triple. I
Okay.
enjoyed it, and I because of my cryptography background, I probably enjoyed it more than most.
Yeah.
But it's he does make it fairly simple. Does that make sense? That's one of the big
Yeah.
challenges with
It's
this.
approachable. I was going to ask you how
Yeah,
difficult is it to read
it's
and
not difficult.
comprehend?
It's kind of like it would be kind of like reading. It almost reads like a whole bunch of kind of science article, like a cool science journal, maybe not like technical journal, but like a magazine, like Popular Science, maybe a whole bunch of articles all about the quantum computing field. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's definitely a normal person can read it, and generally understand it. But there's certainly, if you have a level of understanding beyond mine, then you might get more out of it, if that makes any sense. Um,
Yeah. Does he
understanding.
talk?
Go
Does
ahead.
he talk about? So my understanding with quantum computing is it's will be very fast, but the ability is kind of a narrow, so it can go really quickly. But like you think about artificial intelligence and general intelligence, how you start out with AI maybe playing a chess game. It's really good at that one thing, but maybe not good in carrying on a conversation about other things. Does he
So
talk about that at all?
he actually talks about how quantum computing will help AI get better and vice versa. Does that make sense? So you can it will actually they'll enhance each other. And I don't know that it's going to be super simple. Does that make sense? I don't think it's going to
Yeah.
be necessarily they can only do one thing. I think they just give it a very large problem, mathematical problem, and help, and it can solve it
Yeah.
in multitude of ways very quickly. So I think the sense that I got was kind of the sky's the limit, and it's not going to be like just a deep blue, that's gonna be able to beat somebody at Go or chess or something like that. That it's going
Yeah.
to actually
Yeah.
like maybe be able to design its own deep blue on the fly. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. It's pretty crazy. He does get into kind of he gets into some of the technical stuff about silicon and how it's made and how it's actually really crazy how many different that's probably one of the things that stood out to me the most is how many different options there are for a quantum computer. Whereas in my limited research prior to this about quantum cryptography, I thought there was only one way to build a quantum computer, and there's a multitude of different companies trying different ways, so that they can be more stable or less expensive to build, and those types of things. So I
Well,
would I would give it a triple. I don't know what I can
yeah.
necessarily apply to my life other than uh be excited and hope for some of the potential future future health issues that it might be able to solve and help our understanding of kind of the world that we live in. So anyway,
It's pretty amazing to
yeah,
think
it was
about.
definitely an interesting, cool book. If it's your cup of tea, I'd recommend it, but maybe that kind of goes without saying. Some of the books I've read, I'm like, just check this out. It's unbelievable. Like River of Darkness. I'd say anybody should
Yeah.
read this. It's
Yeah.
it's crazy. This one, I would say, it's you have to be somewhat interested in in it to get through it, even though it is broken down and fairly simple for most people. So
But you need books like that. Somebody like Michio who can take a very heavy, complicated
yeah.
subject. I've seen him present on his theories around string theory in the
Hmm.
universe. He's really entertaining, and you can tell
Yeah.
he's talking about such a complex thing, but he's
Exactly.
able to pull analogies in. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, I kind of understand what you're talking about.
Exactly.
He's a
Exactly.
very good teacher.
Yeah, he does a great job of making it for simple people like me to somewhat
Yeah.
understand.
Oh, me
But
too.
it does
It's
definitely make you realize how much you don't
yeah,
understand.
yeah.
So very
Well,
cool.
at least you recognize that. You're not walking in here today as a quantum computer expert.
Exactly.
All
Definitely do not propose to be that. So tell me about Frederick Douglass. I know a tiny
right.
bit about him, but I'm definitely interested. This is a giant biography that you read. It is
Yeah.
huge.
So
You should show if whoever's watching, just look at this. Look at the size of this book. It looks
just the binding
awesome.
it's a good 2 inches thick. Like the
Yeah.
binding, which usually a book is maybe half that. It's I don't know, 760 pages, and then there's probably 100 pages of just notes. So David Blight is a professor. I'm trying to remember if it's at Stanford or Yale, one of the Ivy League universities. He is obviously an expert in the life of Frederick Douglass. In January, I was, or December rather, I was at this bookstore in Cedar City, Utah. just a cool little bookstore. And I was walking around and I saw this book just kind of perched up on the shelf, and it's got this great image superimposed of Frederick Douglass
Yeah,
on
it's
the
such a
front.
such a cool picture.
It's awesome picture.
Yeah.
And it just kind of, I don't know, it kind of spoke to me. So I pulled it off the shelf. I bought it. I also bought Team of Rivals with Abraham Lincoln, which I'll probably read next. So the book goes through the life of Frederick Douglass, and I remember learning a little bit about him in
Yeah.
U.S. history, the Civil War. He was an abolitionist, very anti-slavery, but reading through his life, it's so cool. There's just like you just don't even. I really didn't know anything about Frederick Douglass before reading the book, so he was half half white, half black. He was born into slavery, and his uh, biological father, his slave owner, um, passed away. And he talks about some of the the brutalities of slavery in his childhood. And when his father passed away, he ends up as part of an estate getting redistributed across the family, and goes to live with a different family. Thomas Auld, Auld, was his last name, but they had never owned slaves. And Thomas's wife, she kind of takes Frederick in and treats him kind of like a one of the family. She reads to him, she reads the Bible to him, starts teaching him how to read. And I'm just thinking, because Frederick Douglass goes on to just have this amazing career and become so famous, not only in the US, but in Europe, in England, not only in writing, but in speaking. He was a tremendous speaker. So I'm just seeing this little boy listening to her. And then he later says that he asked her if she would teach him how to read, because she was teaching him the alphabet.
Mhm.
And so in the biography, just you get this story of him, like his mind is starting to be unlocked. He starts reading the Bible. He starts reading this magazine. I think it was called the Christian Orator or something like that. He's reading it, and his mind starts to become free. He starts to realize. He says the logic of someone owning, or the master owning me, is the same logic as me owning him. This makes
Right.
no sense.
Right. Right.
And so he's got a little band of friends. He just starts uh, putting together a plan. He did try to escape once, was caught, was beaten for that, and then later hatches a plan and he escapes, gets on a train, goes north, and never looks back.
Mhm.
So the story just goes through kind of how he got his beginnings. He talks about he did some labor work, and he remembers he wrote a couple biographies, but in one instance he was helping this elderly lady with some chores around her house, and she gave him these two coins, and he remembers hearing the clink of these coins in his hand. And he was thinking to himself, I'm a free man, like I can make my own way, I can
Mhm.
make my own life, even though he's a fugitive, well, quote unquote fugitive, right? Like he's
Right.
still wanted. So he starts writing, starts going on some little local speaking tours, and then starts traveling. And um, it talks about how he has a great sense of humor. As he would speak, he would make people laugh, just like the logic of some of the crazy things of that day he was bringing to light.
Right.
So he was just an incredible orator. So he travels to England, and as I think in 19 or 18, I want to say 1854, the Republican Party is established, and that really gave new life to this idea that slavery was wrong. And there was a lot of political camps in how to go about abolishing it. Do you do it politically? Do you do it culturally? And
Mhm.
he ends up coming into the camp that um, there's some really good quotes in the book, but and maybe I'll read just a couple of these. But one of the quotes that he's famous for, in 1857, He said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. The struggle may be a moral one or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. So he's that's one of his more famous quotes. Um, as time gets closer, things start to wear on. The Civil War is starting, and he in the book it was kind of interesting because he was very he realized that without a conflict, without a war, that the slaves would never be freed.
Hmm.
There's no way that the South was going to give up the slaves. It just wasn't going to happen.
Mhm.
And so he was of the mind that this war needs to happen. We need to have this conflict and liberate these people.
Hmm.
And there were questions about, well, what do we do with them once they're free? Should we send them to islands or send them, out of the U.S. and like back, So there's all kinds of things that I had never really thought through. Once slavery ended, what does the life of someone who was a slave and is now free look like? Like, how do
Right.
they get work? And
Right.
they're, it's totally foreign to them. So in March of 1861, uh, he said, which of the two, freedom or slavery, shall give law to this republic? Let the conflict come and God speed the right. In May, after the war had begun, he rejoiced. For this consummation we have watched and wished with fear and trembling. God be praised. It has come at last. So he's excited, and I view his job or his role as somebody who is really inspiring the narrative of ending slavery
Hmm.
and getting Northerners of that mindset that this is a war that's worth fighting. So they go to war. One thing that I didn't know reading the book was why they didn't want to have black regiments. So you had white regiments that were fighting, but not black.
Hmm.
And in my head, I knew that, but I had always wondered, why is that? Why would they not want to have black regiments, of
Right.
anybody? They would want to fight more than anyone, and they did. So he argues, and they finally get approval to have the Massachusetts 54th, and they end up going to battle. And there's a whole chapter on just the Massachusetts 54th, and anyways, so you kind of know the end of the story. The Civil War ends up being won, and the book goes through in just great detail of every aspect of his life, all the different trips and relationships that he had, his family, his struggles, his successes. Just an incredible, incredible man that I think was maybe one of those um, what we would call a gray champion during a time of conflict. You look to
Hmm.
the leaders like Lincoln, George Washington, those who help go through the conflict and end up rebuilding on the other side. Although Lincoln didn't make it to the other side, Frederick Douglass did, and
Right.
he was very successful at continuing to be a champion for African Americans. Just a truly inspiring story. So I highly recommend the book. If you don't know anything about Frederick Douglass or the history there, I think today we more resonate with Martin Luther King because he's closer to our time and the
Sure.
civil rights. But you can go back even further and find very talented uh, speakers and writers like Frederick Douglass who just did amazing work. So it was kind of fun to read, and I'm glad I picked up the book in Cedar City. It is a long one though. If you like to read by the pound, that is the book for you.
Read by the pound.
It's a big one. It's a lot of life though. He lived to 77. He died in his house. I think he had a heart attack, but
Huh.
lived to a pretty good age.
What was the most surprising thing about the book or about him?
Um, Boy, the most surprising thing, there was a lot. What really amazed me because I'm reading this book in the span of a month.
Hmm.
So going from like his humble beginnings, learning how to read. I mean, he ran his own newspapers and wrote, it was an editor and a writer and wrote books.
Right.
And I'm just, it really for me just kind of unlocked the potential of mankind. He is an example of that, of going from just absolutely nothing to making an incredible life and inspiring hundreds of thousands of people. So that to me was the most impressive thing reading
Yeah.
about Frederick Douglass. So pretty cool story, American story. You know, there's one point before the war where he would not call the United States his country or
Hmm.
his founding fathers.
Right.
And when they get deep into the war and he realized that it just comes about in a way where he writes in the speech, our founding, like America is now mine,
Right.
because we're going through this great conflict. So he kind of owns the country at that point, and um, just it's kind of see that neat to see that transformation in his mindset
Right.
too, going from a country that's against me to maybe a country that is for me and for my people. And
And
he
worth
never,
fighting
yeah,
for.
yeah, there was one story when he was in England, he got a letter, his because he's a fugitive, right?
Right.
So
Right.
like somebody's still making claim in the South to Frederick Douglass, which is ridiculous because he's like this famous writer and speaker, but he's in England and he learns that his um, quote unquote master is willing to sell him. And the people in England said, "We will raise the money and we will pay for your freedom."
Uh-huh.
And in that moment, you would think, do it. Like, I don't want to be, hunted down. I don't
Right.
want to be chased anymore. Like, let's just, and he would not. He said,
Yeah.
no, he does not own me.
Hmm.
And so he never uh, gave into his principles. That's one thing that was very clear throughout the book. He was all about self-reliance. He wanted to make sure that that those that were freed had a fair chance, that they had a fair shake at life, like an
Right.
opportunity. But he was always talking about self-reliance, like each man needs to, provide for himself and take care of himself.
Hmm.
And that was a message that he taught. So coming forward to today, and I'll maybe share just this one last thought. But reading at that time, there were points where Lincoln was trying to keep the states together and didn't want to go to war, was trying to politically maneuver any other possible way.
Right.
And Frederick Douglass hated that. He wanted to just let's do it. Let's go. Quit backing down. And you can Lincoln's trying to figure it out politically. And I look to today, and you do have these narrators that are maybe unbending, but in politics, it just doesn't work that way. It's you can't always um, be, I guess, a purist because nothing ever actually happens. And in this case, I think Frederick Douglass was right in that the war, there was no other way. Like that had to happen, and Lincoln eventually realized that. And
Hmm.
when he did, we went to war, and he ends up being a huge supporter of Lincoln, giving lots of speeches about Lincoln's life and the man that he was too. So they were a pretty good partnership. So I'd give this book, if you like really dense, fact-filled biographies that go into great detail, this book is probably a home run. When I compare the biography to like a Walter Isaacson book on Benjamin Franklin, it's maybe not as entertaining, like
Sure.
the storytelling. This is more, feels kind of like you're reading a journal, but you do get a lot of sense of the times and that they lived in and the things that were happening, and gives it just a copious amount of detail in the book. So,
Well, and
so
he wrote three of his own autobiographies, right? So I'm assuming there's a lot of journal type of
he
entries
did.
or yeah.
Yeah. His life is well documented. And as you're reading through the book, there's little um, they're, I'm not gonna pronounce this right because I wasn't sure how to say it as I was reading it, but they're daguerreotype pictures. So there's lots of pictures, and
Yeah.
I think my favorite one, he's an old man. He's got long white hair. He's got a beard, and he's
Yeah.
sitting in a chair, and his grandson is playing the violin. And he just seems really pleased and proud, that my grandson is playing the violin, and all the terrible things that he had experienced in his life. He had placed his family in a place of stability, but he lost something like 10 grandchildren, lost his first wife, got remarried later in life. So he had a lot of pain and a lot of friction, no doubt. But I was pleased at the end because I never heard, how did Frederick Douglass die? And he died as an old man, and that was a good thing for him and for the country.
Very cool.
Pretty cool story. So I enjoyed it.
Oh no, it's awesome.
Worth reading.
I'm glad to learn a little. Like I said, I knew a little bit, but definitely so much more to know. And what an awesome American, really, like a
Yeah,
hero, American hero, really.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
I would say a great champion.
yeah,
And again, we focus really a lot on Lincoln, which
yeah,
we absolutely should. But I think, and maybe there is a movie about Frederick Douglass, but it would be really cool
yeah,
to follow that through his life.
yeah.
So maybe somebody listening to the podcast will pick that story up because it's pretty cool. And if you need, some content, pick up
You
this
got it.
book by David W. Blight.
And it doubles as a workout as well while you're reading. So it's very good.
It is, when you're reading a paper book that heavy, you do feel that. I mean,
Yeah,
you are kind of doing some curls
yeah, exactly.
every time you pick it up and put it down, but it's totally worth it. So I'm going to read Team of Rivals. I'm kind of studying these historical moments in the U.S. that were pivotal: the Civil War, Revolutionary War, World War II, and learning about these different great champions. So
Yeah, I remember as a kid, my dad was in the military, and we used to go back east for a couple weeks a year, so he could do his military service. He was in the reserves when I was a kid, and we would go to all these Civil War sites, and I would just be so bored because I was this dumb kid, and now I wish I could go back and I would definitely relish those moments a lot more with some of the history that I enjoy now. So it's
yeah,
kind of sad, but very cool. All righty. Well, thanks everyone for listening. We really appreciate it. Spread the word. Let us know what you guys think. Give us some feedbacks. Rate the podcast 5 stars, and spread the word. And go check out some books. Thanks, everybody.